Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here, and today we got a most interesting video uploaded to the Warships channel where they discuss some further changes to submarines. And unlike the changes we got in update 13.1, these changes are just outright nerfs to submarines, and nerfs in a big way and in a good way for those of you that don't like shotgunning, which is probably most of you guys watching, myself included. So shotgunning, if you live under a rock, it's a method of submarine warfare that is ironically more accurate-ish to real life than a lot of other ways that submarines interact with surface ships in this game. But of course, since submarines can go like 30 knots at periscope depth and stuff, it's not exactly the same as it would be in real life. It's when you sneak up to a target ship from about, like 2.5, 2.9 kilometers away, you dump all of your forward set of torpedo tubes into the ship, and of course, unless you are engaging, a super ship or something that has a ridiculous amount of HP or great torpedo protection, you are probably going to blow it out of the water with just your forward set of torpedoes. But if that doesn't sink it, you can, just dive under, pop on up, and let the rear set of torpedo tubes go if you got those, and, well, the ship is probably definitely sunk at that point. And you can often do this depending upon what ship you are using without even being detected, right? So like the target ship can have no clue that you're there, and you can just blow them out of the water. If I still have the replay, you're probably watching me do it in a Gato to a Hanover, and as you can see, it's not very difficult. And in fact, if it wasn't a Hanover that I'm walking up on right now that, didn't have hydroacoustic search, I could have gotten away with this completely scot-free. But I'm sure most of you are familiar with that, but if you aren't familiar, that's what it is. And this is a problem that's been plaguing the game for some time. It's a very frustrating encounter, right? Because if you are the capital ship and you're not really paying 125% attention to your surroundings, you're not realizing that you're spotted, there's no other, notification or sign that there's a submarine around other than you being spotted. And even if you are aware that you're spotted and you're maneuvering and such, well, submarines are very fast and very nimble, and they can pretty much keep up with you in most cases, or at least keep up with you enough to still pull this off. So it's a very frustrating method of gameplay, because for the submarine player, they essentially get to just annihilate you out of the water, unless again you have something like hydroacoustic search, or there's a ship around you that has hydro, or you have one of the ships that have submarine surveillance around you right now. There's no real other way for you to know where they're coming from and be able to take appropriate action. With destroyers, at least, that sneak up to you from 5 kilometers away, the stealthiest higher tier destroyer, all those cap at about 5.5, 5.6 kilometers. So if they get any closer than that to you, they're going to get spotted. And you can do things like, of course, launch your fighter and stuff. And destroyers, of course, they can't deliver torpedoes 2 kilometers away from you, so they still have to guesstimate, at least from 5 kilometers away, what direction you are going. And they're probably not going to get exactly on target unless you are just sailing in a perfectly straight line, right? So they still have to, do some guesstimations. They have to spread their torpedoes out, whereas submarines, again, they can literally just walk up to you and just blast you out the water, right? So it's a very frustrating situation in the game right now, shall we say. But anyway, what are they doing? Well, they've announced in a previous post that they were messing with the idea of adjusting the torpedo speed. Like, the torpedo will need time to speed up from, a certain distance away from the target. Like for the first 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers of the runtime of the torpedo, it only goes like, 40% or 50% of its, top speed, which would give the surface ship time to maneuver and, hopefully avoid most of the torpedoes. But now, today, and I don't know if they're still working on that, but this is a new feature that they've announced. They've announced a dynamic damage system for these torpedoes. And it's pretty harsh, I'm not going to lie. So with this new system in place, the way that this works is that if you launch torpedoes at a target that is underneath 2.9 kilometers away, so within 3 kilometers, the torpedo will only do 10% of its maximum damage. So it's essentially like an overpin, right? And then from 3 kilometers to 5 kilometers, to 3 kilometers, the torpedo will increase its alpha back to 100%. So if you are 3 kilometers in, essentially, 2.9 kilometers in, your torpedo is going to do basically 10% of your damage. And then from 2.9 kilometers to 3 kilometers, it will do 100% of its maximum damage. So that is pretty drastic of a change, if you ask me. This means that you have to fire your torpedo from at least 3 kilometers away now from the target. So you might be thinking, well, it's still 3 kilometers. That's still incredibly close. And you're not wrong. That is still incredibly close to the target, right? But if you combined this change with the acceleration change, then that's going to be pretty rough, right? So if you are, say the Gato, and you're trying to torpedo a shotgun a ship, well, now you have to at least launch your torpedoes from 3 kilometers away if you want to get the full damage, right? And then add on top of that the fact that if they do follow through with the dynamic acceleration, then sure, you can still launch it from 3 kilometers away, which is very close, but it's gonna take, probably like, I believe it was like 5 kilometers is the range they were trying to work with the acceleration thing. 5 kilometers for your torpedoes to build up the speed in order for them to travel at their full, 80, 90 knots, whatever the unguided torpedoes and the Gato travel. I think it's like 75 knots, something like that. It's got to take time for the torpedoes to speed up. So now the surface ship has several things going in their favor. One, if they close the distance to the Gato and they get within, 2.9 kilometers of the Gato, the torpedo's only going to do, a few hundred damage, which, to most tier 10 ships is pretty negligible, right? Or, some manner of a percentage of the maximum damage of the torpedo. And plus, the torpedo's not going to be going that fast. It's going to be going, again, depending upon how close the Gato lets its torpedoes rip, but from like 3 kilometers, they're probably only be going like 40 or 50 knots, which is pretty slow by torpedo standards, right? If you've seen the German light cruiser destroyers, the Elbing line, those go 55 knots, and those are known as sea mines because they go so slow, right? So it's a system which might work, but yet again, all of these changes, all these crazy, we have dynamic speed, now we have dynamic damage, which both of these things are still work in progress mechanics, so they may not make it to the game in this form. They might tweak them some more, but this is what they're trying to do to address this situation. But one of the biggest things they could do, and one of the most simplest things they could do, which I don't understand why they haven't done it yet, because it's another big complaint about submarines, is address periscope speed. Because the way submarines are able to sneak up on these ships that are, out and about by themselves, is because submarines can still travel at their full surface speed when they're at periscope depth. It doesn't make any sense, because submarines, even at tier 10, when they dive, they go like 18 knots underwater, unless again you're the 4501, which can go almost 40 knots, but every other submarine can go like 18, 19, maybe 20 knots underwater, which is downright slow by tier 10 standards. And if you go down the line to, the submarines typically go slower than most battleships of that tier, right? So they are slow by the game standards underwater, again, except for the 4501. This is because, of course, back in World War II, submarines were not really submarines. They were surface ships which could dive for a very short amount of time, but they operated most of the time on the surface, which is why when you look at most of these submarine hulls that were around during World War II, they still look like boats. They got that, bow look to them, right? They got a bow that's designed to cut through the waves. It's not designed to operate underwater. It wasn't really till some of the late war German submarines were truly designed to operate underwater rather than run at the surface. So the hull is designed to, again, run on the surface more than underwater. It's why submarines today don't look like normal boats. They have the that tube shape to them, right? They're a tube underwater because that's what's best for the physics and stuff underwater. The what's it called, like the hydrophysics or whatever underwater. So when these ships dive under the water, they're in a different environment, right? Pushing through water is different than, pushing through air and, having half of your hull submerged in water, right? The physics have changed, so they can't go as fast underwater. And plus they're running on battery power, right? Then they don't have, their diesel engines going. But anyway, when you're traveling at periscope depth, you're still going at full blast, right? And you can cover the distance you need to cover from your detection range, well, what would be your surface detection range, about 7 kilometers to 2 kilometers, pretty fast, because you're still traveling like 30 something knots, right? You're still going as fast as, most of the, slow destroyers at your tiers, so you can cover that distance incredibly fast, blast the ship out of the water, and dive under and never be seen. If they would just nerf periscope speed to even be like just 2/3 speed, right? If you force the, since you're still, kind of not really half in, but if Wargaming just wants periscope speed to be faster than submerged speed, if you even nerf it down to like 2/3 maximum speed, like say your top speed is 30 something knots, when you're at periscope speed, your top speed is now like 23 knots. It's slightly faster than your submerged speed, but I mean, most of your ship is underwater. The physical environment that the ship is having to push itself through has changed, right? So it should be going at least a little bit slower than your full board surface speed, and then dive under the water. Now your speed is like 18 knots, right? If they would do that, that would greatly impact the ability for for submarines to use shotgun surface ships. I know, I've been doing it in the Gato, right? Like, that's how it works, because when you're at periscope depth, your detection range is like 2.2 kilometers or 2.5 kilometers or something ridiculously small like that. And when you have a detection radius that's that small and you're going friggin' 30 knots, yeah, it makes this so easy to pull off. So, seriously, if they would nerf periscope speed, that would pretty much solve shotgunning almost. Because again, if you're only going 23 knots at periscope speed, and again, I'm talking like in tier 10 terms here, obviously, you would adjust it as appropriate for the lower tiers. You're not going as fast. It's harder to cover that distance, and it makes you burn more battery to where you can't just sell off when you still have, 80% of your battery life intact, right? So it would make it more difficult. You wouldn't have to worry about this dynamic speed and this dynamic damage thing they're trying to do here with the torpedoes. But I will give them this. They are trying to address it. And these are, again, some pretty harsh changes. 3 kilometers away. You have to be 3 kilometers away, plus with the upcoming dynamic torpedo speed. You put that together, that is pretty rough. I will give them that. But then you got to think about, okay, well, what happens if, you got a sub fight going on. Most of those take place at under 3 kilometers. So now submarines just can't fight each other anymore underwater, right? And then like what happens when you're being chased by a destroyer and you aren't trying to shotgun the destroyer, but the destroyer's trying to sail on top of you and you're out of battery, you got to come to the surface. You're just dead now within 3 kilometers, because unless you're the I-56 or the Thrasher with the deck mounted gun, you don't have any way to defend yourself within those 3 kilometers. Even if you're not trying to shotgun, you're just that's just the nature of the engagement. I know some of you are probably going, well, I love that. I love that now I'm encouraged to push up and deal with destroyers. And I mean, yeah, this does do that, but I mean, I'm just trying to think about both sides here, right? But that's some of the upcoming changes to submarines. Again, it's all work in progress. It might change. This might not ever make it out of the development sphere, but you can check out the whole video. I'll link it to the comment in the comments. I'll link it in the description, and yeah, I'll throw it in a pinned comment down below if you want to check out the video for yourself and see what they are talking about. But let me know what you guys think about this in the comments down below. If you think this is a good change, a bad change, or I know a lot of you just going to say, well, I'll just remove submarines altogether, that'll fix everything. I'm sure it would, but at this point, I mean, they've dumped so much money into it, and you do generally have players that do enjoy playing submarines, right? So at this point, they're here to stay. But let me know what other changes you would make to submarines down below. Hope you guys have a wonderful Thursday, a wonderful rest of your week, and hope to catch you guys in the next one.